Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Rebecca Holland. A lot of you will recognize Rebecca from episode 442, health coach Rebecca Holland on hormone balancing strategies that help women lose weight permanently and how cortisol can ruin your progress. In today's podcast, we are going to talk about everything to do with health, weight loss, and hormones in a very special in-person podcast, which I don't do too many of these. So re-popping the cherry. Rebecca, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Delighted. Really looking forward to this off the back of the last one.
Oh, me too. The feedback from that episode was incredible. And I'm going to follow on, although we're going to go in a lot of different directions today, with a quote of yours. In one of your posts, you talk about your story, about the twins, 2020 and beyond. A lot of people can check out your Instagram off the back of this. Tremendous value on that page. But I'm going to pull out a quote and I want you to talk around it to get us started. Remember, hormone balance is as much about mental health as it is about physical health. Time to get out of fight or flight and start balancing your hormones in a realistic way. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think the penny dropped in 2020 when I had the twins and I realised the stress of that made so much physical change in my body. And I started to realise, like, even if I was doing all the reps with the physical changes, like the nutrition, the sleep, all that, if I didn't have my mental health in a good place, physiologically, that's going to put me in a fight or flight response, which is going to change the way my body responds to blood sugars. And it just hit me so hard that year. And I felt like this kind of trapped feeling. You know, when you feel like the walls are coming in on you. And I was like, wow, I cannot continue to do all the physical changes anyway if my mental health isn't in a good place. So it was like that moment of, oh my gosh, so much women are like banging their heads against the wall trying to make the physical changes of the food, for example, but their mental health isn't in a good place. So they're not even digesting or absorbing the food properly anyway because of what's happening in the body. So I was just like, this isn't known. People aren't understanding this. They're just doing the typical like, oh, eat the probiotics, eat the good food, do the exercise, not understanding that, first of all, it's very hard to be consistent with any of them if your mental health's in the bin anyway. So for me, it was like that moment of, okay, this is what you need to teach people. This is what you need to understand, that link between what happens in your brain and how that impacts your body. And even like when we get headaches, when we get back pain, that's all linked to our thinking. You know, all of that can be tied to what's going on in your brain. So it was just that moment for me. It's not just two boxes, mental and physical health.
What's the biggest misconception you see around hormone balancing at the minute? And I would imagine, like what you mentioned there, that your mental health impacts your physiology, which is massive. You're so right in that your thinking is going to impact everything that's going on underneath. But people have massive misconceptions around hormone balancing. I think on your Instagram, it's not a surprise. You've over 1 million followers, tremendous engagement. You have great content for people. For those who aren't following, I highly recommend checking it out off the back of this podcast, giving it a follow, because there's so much educational stuff there. But what's the misconception you see the most at the minute when it comes to hormone imbalance or balancing that is doing the rounds, whether it's regard to health or weight loss or body composition in general?
Yeah. I think a big one lately is this idea that if you like regulate your stress and the hormone cortisol, that automatically weight loss will happen. That's a huge one. And then the other side of it as well is people not understanding the way that hormone impacts all the other hormones, like the kind of domino effect. And I think there's been a big thing, like, and I do get comments sometimes of people saying, well, you know, of course it's the law of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out. And I'm like, absolutely, right? That's a fact. But we need to realize that we can physiologically and behaviorally make that more difficult. So if we're stressed all the time, of course, it's going to change our behaviors with food, with craving more sugar, with your sleep habits and sleep hygiene. So it's kind of understanding like nothing is black or white. With hormones, everything is it's pretty grey. So everyone responds differently as well. So I think like getting the point across that when you're extremely stressed, your body responds differently. And it's not just, oh, you regulate cortisol, everything's fixed, weight loss happens, boom, boom, boom. There's also all the behaviors behind that you need to reinforce. They're much easier to reinforce when you're not totally dysregulated and your nervous system is actually semi-regulated. It's obviously much easier then you're able to be present more. You're not going to work off autopilot. So I think there just needs to be that expansion of thoughts and thinking around how we're not robots. And of course, we need to think logically around all of it. And there's no camp that's right or wrong with it. It's like a sum of things, if that makes sense.
100%. I want to ask a question, because something that is a little bit of a professional pet peeve for me is the calories in, calories out. As you mentioned there, law of thermodynamics, calories definitely matter. But when people obsess about this one thing, not checking out the nutrient density of the food, the nourishing element of the food, the micronutrients of the food, and just being like, I need to get into a calorie deficit. And by all means, that will elicit fat loss in a lot of people in most cases, but it doesn't consider hormone balancing, energy output, recovery from workouts, all these other things that are the sum of the parts. Is cortisol your equivalent of that? Is that the one you see most often? For me, it's calories. Or people are like, I'm not losing weight, I'm plateauing, my calories are X amount per day. Yes. And then sometimes they're not actually in the deficit, and other times it's just that they've stalled because they haven't increased their metabolic rate from exercise, from balancing sleep, etc. All these other things that play a huge role. Is cortisol your equivalent of that?
Yes, I would see so much how especially women underestimate how stressed they are. Even if it's not just mental stress. So like, we all think immediately of the psychological stress, our relationships or our job. But then there's a lot of physical stressors that are elevating cortisol in the body that people are not acknowledging. So like, exactly what you said, a diet that's not nutrient dense. That's a stressor on the body. A slight lack of sleep. And I actually, the other day, a friend of mine was saying like she's getting 7.5 hours sleep a night, but she feels the best when she gets 8 hours. And I was thinking, after 1 week, you're in a massive deficit of sleep because that builds up. That's a stressor. Your body's stressed. So it's like acknowledging there's a lot of different types of stressors going on. And when we look at nervous system regulation, people think, oh, if I do a few deep breaths a day and maybe have a bath, that ticks me off. And I'm like, hold on a second. This is extremely subjective. Like, Brian might be doing loads of things that are stacking stressors. So you need that extra meditation. You need the extra time outside. You need the extra time when you're in the flow and you're doing a hobby, for example. Whereas another person mightn't have that many stressors going on. So a bit of breath work might be enough for them. But it's like realizing that majority need a lot more than they think. So like, if they're doing a vagus nerve exercise a day plus 5 deep breaths, that is fantastic to begin with. But if you've had like a year of a lot of stress and maybe some trauma thrown in the mix, you probably need to delve a little bit more into it.
What's your personal go-tos for stress? I know it's very subjective based on individual, and you're running a very successful business. You've got the twins at home, but what's your kind of go-to personally?
Yeah, it's actually hilarious when I think of this, because like, I stack so many stresses on myself. And I'm like telling everyone, meditate.
Relax, calm down.
Relax,
don't do as much.
Chill out, guys. But I'm like, I'm single parent, running the business. Right now we're living with mom while we're trying to build a house. And the other day I was like laughing at myself basically, because I was like, now is the time to double down. But yeah, my goals to are, I love EFT tapping. Like, I just really find that's only a new one for me. I always do the daily meditation. Sometimes it's guided, sometimes it's just mantras. Would do a lot of vagus exercises, like manual stimulation around the neck. I like lymphatic drainage as well. But yeah, lately actually it's narrowed down to simpler things of just like simply checking in with myself, putting my hand on my chest, taking a deep breath and ask what I need. Like, it's actually gone so basic now, the things I do daily, because they become more automatic. But yeah, definitely EFT tapping, some level of deep breathing. But for me, like, everything stems from my sleep routine. That's such a part of regulation for me, massively. And exercise. I've always like heavily relied on exercise, but realize as you get older, maybe, there's a lot of circumstances. Some days you can't do an hour run. So it's like, you need the other tools as well. So I think it's like making this big toolbox. And then you can pick and choose the days you need them. Like, some days simply reading a book and doing a bit of journaling will be enough. I'm a big journaler. I've journaled since I was like 10. But then other days I just need more. And I'm like, God, I need to go out in nature for like an hour and just walk and have no other stimulation, because I'm totally overstimulated from 4-year-old twins like hitting me, So it's just, it depends. It depends on the day. But yeah, and that's what I realize as well. Like, so much people are going around thinking, well, me and all my friends are doing this. Like, we're all getting, doing all the school runs, doing a full-time job, lots of other things like health issues, whatever there is. And we think like this is normal. So if that's normal, we don't really need to do that much regulation techniques, because it's normal. Everyone's doing it. But we're not living in a society that's optimal for health. So of course you have to create these solutions. And somebody said to me before, Jesus, like, it sounds so complicated. I'm like, we're literally just trying to grasp what we had 100 years ago. more headspace, more time like in the flow, more time with your kids, more time with loved ones, connection. We're just trying to dial down our overthinking. And like that was a massive one for me of like quietening the overthinking and not living like on 10x speed, because most of us do. And I think that hit me the most.
What's your check-in for when you need those regulation techniques? Because we were talking before this about the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And that this is something that we innately know that there's something going on internally that is manifesting itself in stress or overthinking or just not being able to calm the mind. What's your check-in for that? Do you have like what I call yellow flags? So for me, when I'm overstressed, I get sick. It's my immune system that tends to go. I know when I'm pushing it too hard, too many stimulants, not enough sleep, too much exercise, too much work, I get sick.
Yeah.
And I don't get sick.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so
Yeah.
I that's my check-in. It's kind of like a yellow flag before the red.
Yes.
Do you have any body cues that serve as yellow flags?
I love that question because we just talked about this in a live with my clients the other day, and we were like, what is your individual, like, as you say, yellow flags? Okay. And when I look back, for me, it's always skin issues. I get urticaria, like that's just rash on the skin. Headaches are always like my first one. When I get a headache, I'm like, okay, there's tension in your neck. You know what's happening here. So it's like, if you think when you're a little bit under pressure, what happens? And like you say, you know your cues. A lot of people don't. So for me, it's the headaches, it's the skin, and it's shallow breathing from my chest. I know when I start to get a little bit too stressed because I'm not doing much like diaphragmatic breathing throughout the day. I'm just breathing from my chest, which means I'm probably in or going into a fight or flight response. And I just feel like short of breath all day. And also it's my responses. I'm reacting. I'm just on reacting mode. And like straight away I'm answering the kids too quick. I'm not pausing for a moment to like digest what they said. It's just all on autopilot. You know the feeling when you're on autopilot, and that's such a signal to me like, oh, stop now. That's it. And the other side of it is sleep. I know when I'm slightly stressed because I'll push my bedtime later because I'll be like dying to distract myself in the evening when the kids are asleep for that, you know, quote unquote, alone time. And it's just like kind of, it's ironic because the last thing I need is more time awake. You need more sleep when you're stressed. And that's the other thing I always double down on when I am feeling like the pressure's on a little bit. Pull the bedtime earlier. That extra bit of sleep is needed because there's more things to process. There's more regeneration to be done and repair at nighttime to be done. So it's like, okay, no matter how much you want to stay up and doom scroll and get your alone time, it's the body needs more rest, which is such an annoying thing to hear because, like, of course, we just want to be distracted in that time. But that's, for me, is like a reminder. And when the twins were born, for like a year and a half, pretty much after that, I was getting, I would say on average, for a lot of months, 2 to 4 hours a night sleep, max in a 24-hour period. And I fully understood, like, okay, I understand how people get sleep deprivation psychosis. Totally understood it because your mental health is so impacted by sleep. And that tie between nervous system regulation and sleep is so deep. And think about all the people that will say, I want a better night's sleep. I'm doing all the physical things. I'm doing the wind down routine. I'm getting my daylight. I'm looking at my temperature in the evening. I'm doing my meal timings right? I'm blood sugar balanced, okay? But my sleep is still shit. Regulation. It's completely down to that and what's going on in the nervous system and your ability to not overthink. And I think that for me, like actually the kids were, they were waking me multiple times in the night. But my issue was I couldn't get back to sleep because I was like bouncing between fight or flight and freeze mode continuously for that year. Like I was not really leaving either. I wasn't getting into a rest and digest state at all, essentially. And that's it. I can't even blame the twins that much because it was actually me. It was me not being able to get back to sleep. So that just was such like an eye opener of a time period. So painful, but it taught me so much about my response to stress, about how much the nervous system plays a role in your health at that time as well. Like I had the urticaria, I had chronic headaches, like my hair was falling out. All the things were happening in my body, responding to that like deep level of dysregulation. And obviously what was going, it wasn't just because I had kids, all this happened. I was going through a breakup with their dad. So that really, and I moved back to Ireland. We lived in England. My whole life was like turned upside down and it was COVID. So there was this like feeling of being like completely trapped. And it's hard to explain that to someone unless they've experienced that kind of walls coming in you feeling like I can't get out of this, I'm boxed in. And that then puts you in a place of it's really hard to think rationally, like really hard to see the positive in anything. Like I was trying to do the daily gratitude practice and I wanted to just scream. Like there was such a level of like a mixture of sadness and anger inside me each day. So I think I kind of like to talk about that to clients because a lot of people will resonate with the kind of darker times you experience. And that's when it's really hard to make behavior change. And you see on social media, like just do all these behaviors, bingo, bango, like done. But of course, we can be in a chapter of our life where implementation of anything is so difficult. And it's really that small incremental thing. Like the thing that helped me the most at that time was walking. I was just walking every day with the pram. I was never a walker before that. But I realized if I'm moving forward and moving my eyes left to right, of course, there's that physiological thing where you're feeling a little bit more safe. You're moving forward away from the danger your body perceives. There was no danger, but my body was perceiving I'm in huge danger. And I think it's like if you can cling on to like one thing, just like one thing. Mine was walking at the time. At that time, I didn't see the value or know much about breath work, or I wasn't journaling like prompts to help me really. And I wasn't doing a level of gratitude practice because I was so far removed from that at that point. So I think, yeah, it's like thinking of one thing at that point. I just love to reiterate that to people because if you try and do that like 10-step daily routine, you're fucked. You know, it's just too much.
Capacity is the word that with all the psychologists, therapists, anyone that does trauma work, nervous system regulation work, capacity is the word that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
What's your capacity in the moment?
Absolutely.
And sometimes your capacity is ice bath in the morning, gym, tracking your meals, breath work, meditate. You've got this massive amount of capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's times when you're going through a breakup, you've got twins that aren't sleeping, you've got stress in life where you're like, fuck this. Your capacity shrinks. It's like a 2-liter bottle that shrinks down to a 0.5-liter bottle. You just don't have the capacity. And sometimes I think an element of being kinder to yourself and compassionate to yourself is very important.
Yeah.
Very difficult to do that in the moment, but it is. And
that's such a skill. Yeah.
Brings me on to the next question. With that, how did you come out of that? You obviously used the walking as an anchor.
Yeah.
And I always tell people doing something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Or the acronym in Rewire Your Mindset is how can I win? WIN. What's important now? What can you do today that will help? What's your capacity like today?
Yeah.
What can you do today that's actually going to help you? And some days it'll be a workout, some days it'll be a cold shower, some days it'll be going to the sauna, some days it'll be a relaxing bath, other days it's just getting out for that walk. How did that look for you? So that darkness time, and the reason I bring it up is hormonal balance, weight loss, nervous system regulation, all these things are interconnected. And that point in your life was a darker period. You were working through a dark time. What got you out of it? Obviously, the walking was a bridge and a stepping stone, but what followed on from that?
Yeah. I kind of reflected back on that because there was such a shift in my thinking when they turned about 1.5. And I was beginning to get sleep back. So I was like, oh my God, I'm seeing the world in a completely different way now. And also like a lot of the work from the breakup, and I was doing therapy and things were slotting into place and I was feeling a little bit better. But a huge part of it for me was I had just spent like a decade thinking I could never have kids because I had amenorrhea from overexercise and undereating from all my 20s. And that was one part I began to see, like, just feel the gratitude for naturally having twins. I was just like, oh my God, the body's amazing. But then there was a few things I was doing, like along with the walking, I started to be tighten up the sleep a little bit with like what was controllable. So, okay, I was journaling a prompt like, why did you feel this level of anger today? Or why did you, and I was beginning to process things a little bit more. Plus, I think at that point, what was so important for me was reaching out to other people, like friendships, building them again. Because what happened in COVID was obviously you're very isolated and you forget like a huge component of health is connection. And there was, when you have that lack of connection, it's so debilitating for your health. And I think that was a huge part of like talking about it more and just like making the effort to communicate what was going on in my head, because I was bottling up a lot. And that sounds like such a cliche, but it is an important reminder, I think. to understand that. But yeah, it's hard. And then that was at the point then very shortly after that, I decided right now it's time to start a business. I was finished being a PE teacher and I was able to put a lot of my focus into that. And I think that was the making of me in the sense that I had purpose. That was not just my kids. It was something else as well, something I was passionate in. So I was very lucky. I put on like the blinkers essentially and just really went in with that. And I think that's important, even if it wasn't a business or something like that, something that you go into the flow state. Like I would have done what I was doing for free forever because time passed without me realizing, when I'm coaching. So I think that's a huge thing, like finding something that pauses your thinking for a few minutes. I get it from books and running as well. When I read, that was another thing. I started to read novels that were lighter rather than just like self-help ones. And that got me out of my head for a little bit of time. So did running. And I think that was a massive part of it, like finding what gets me just out of my thoughts for a little bit. I wasn't an experienced meditator then. I did not feel like calm after meditation. Often when you're in fight or flight response anyway, you don't want to meditate. You want to do something movement-wise. So yeah, all them things kind of came together at once and I felt like a massive lift of, okay, I'm finding more connection with people. I have some level of interest and purpose with the new career. And I was starting to build on, when you get sleep, it's so much easier to actually make the changes as well. And that was the moment I started to really delve into circadian health and regulation, because I needed the two in order for me to progress. And someone that used to be so obsessed with nutrition and exercise, I actually realized in terms of hierarchy, I badly needed at the top of my pyramid, nervous system regulation. Then I needed sleep. Then I needed to start thinking about nutrition and exercise, not the other way around, because I was too fatigued to be exercising hard anyway. I was too mentally and physically fatigued from lack of sleep. So it was funny how my priorities really shifted. Like people do it the opposite way. They're like, oh, if I nail my nutrition and exercise, everything's okay. But not necessarily.
And for some it does, but everyone tends to put it through that lens when in reality you might have to come at it from a different pyramid foundation, i.e. nervous system regulation, the sleep. I want to ask a question on old patterns and things that you've unlearned in recent years, because I did a podcast recently where this is coming out, we're recording this in December, it's coming out in January, with Kathy Heller, and Kathy's got one of the top spiritual podcasts in the world. And she had an interview with Matthew McConaughey, the Hollywood actor, and they were speaking about cortisol addiction, that cortisol is as addictive as heroin in some people because it's constant, it's just circulating through your body and you can't bring yourself out of that fight or flight state, and you get so used to being in it that it can be very, very addictive. I had to learn over the years that as a quote unquote self-identification type A, extreme go, that I actually need to be more, I have to meditate more. Like I will train 5 hours a day if you let me. I will work 26 hours a day if you let me. Like I will do these extremes when in reality the counterbalance and the harmony comes in me learning to meditate, do the breath work, take time off, take weekends off, be with my family, be with my friends, be with people that are important to me. I had to unlearn that go type A cortisol driven addiction actually is going to put me into an early grave if I keep doing this. At worst, early grave. At best, run me into the ground and I'll make myself sick. You mentioned there about autopilot, and we spoke right before we went on air about in our 20s that we kind of just ran off programming. Like the ski slopes, we would just go down a specific slope and that's the pattern, like an old record playing. It plays the same way every time. And in your 30s, in my 30s, we started to question some of these belief systems. What's something either about nervous system regulation or hormones or just yourself in general, Becca, that you learned or unlearned in recent years? Because you've done a lot of work with journaling, with therapy, with the podcast, with the business growth, with the girls. You know, sometimes your kids are your mirror back to, oh my God, I used to do that. I need to unpack that. That's an old expired belief system. Time to unlearn that. What comes to mind when I say old patterns, autopilot behaviors, and things that you've unlearned in recent years?
Yeah. It's so funny. Like you say, one of the twins is mini me. Like she just oh my, it's scary to watch her because it's like watching me at that age. I was like very fiery. I thought that you could exercise your way out of everything. If you stay really strong and tough and just drive on, everything will be fine. Don't pause to lean into any emotion. Nope. Like keep moving forward, drive. And that was like me for such a long time. And I was definitely in this place of always pushing forward and never leaning into an emotion. Never actually leaning. My therapist was like, you could give therapy to me. Like, you know all this, all the analogies, you read up about it, you listen to it, but I was not feeling any of it. And that's like it was such a moment for me of like nearly hilarious in like a very tragic way of I could analyze and understand everything that happened, right? And even in childhood as well. But at that moment wasn't feeling any of it. So there was such a disconnect. And that's what I had to learn, which was actually painful enough to learn because you have to lean into these emotions you've been avoiding for decades. And that is like this moment of, Jesus, this is the deep stuff I've needed to do for a long time. And it's funny, like short-term pain, long-term gain. Yes, it is painful in the moment, but wow, is that going to open up a completely new life to you when you process and feel the emotion we all avoid with scrolling, with eating, with all these other behaviors that distract us in an unhealthy way. And of course, now we're all masters of distraction and overthinking because there's so many things in the modern world that allow us to go down different avenues of distraction. So for me, that was like a discipline to learn of not to keep avoiding. Because I would like that. I'd go off on a 2 or 3 hour run, and I'd be like, oh, that's me, done. Don't need to do anything now. That's me processed. I processed all that there in the run. When I'm listening to, music and podcasts and totally distracting myself and just kicking it down the line. So it's just so funny how we behave. And I think a lot of people behave like that. That it's just, it's so funny, all them videos on social media that are like, oh, like gym is my therapy. And I'm like, you need gym and therapy.
yeah.
It's not just one of the, maybe some journaling too,
Yeah.
So
while you're on the treadmill.
While on the treadmill, yeah. That was what the moment for me of been like, and I think even like I've had a good few therapists over the years and all of them at the end were like, our work is done. You're not feeling anything. And I would say that's what they're thinking. That didn't tell me. My therapist ghosted me. That's one of my therapists actually ghosted me. He was like, oh, I don't have any appointments for a while. Like, and I could see he was just like tired.
That's how you know something's wrong. When your therapist is ghosting you, you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, I'm like, any more articles, any more books you're going to suggest to me? Any more podcasts? I need to learn more about gaslighting and all these other things. Like, I think I was like trying to become a psychologist unknown to myself, but not feeling anything. So I think that's a huge part of it. It's like all this work, all the work we're doing with all the behaviors mentally and physically, unless you're actually feeling the emotions, just like the body keeps the score, it's going to be trapped inside you and it's going to come out in sickness or it's going to come out in ruining relationships or self-sabotage. So unless you fully have that self-awareness, you're going to find it quite difficult to actually make sustainable habits anyway, because there'll be that level of self-sabotage.
Talk to us about self-sabotage and the link with emotions, because the question I was going to ask, well, and this is something I've been thinking about more so in the last 12, 18 months, is emotions that you've been avoiding for decades, to use your language, showing it up in self-sabotage around food, in self-sabotage around your hormonal balance, and if particularly for females, but males too, and we're talking two primary genders and not getting into this rabbit hole of everything else, but just in terms of our focus with the population we work with, having hormonal imbalance is something that is going to reduce your energy levels. It's going to negatively impact your sleep, especially if it's cortisol being too high. But there's an element of the emotions tying to that you've got unprocessed anger, unprocessed sadness, unprocessed grief, unprocessed insert emotion here. And sometimes we can obsess about the calories, about the food, when in reality, well, if you fix this thing over here, process that emotion, you wouldn't self-sabotage as often as you potentially do, or you wouldn't emotionally eat. And the irony is, when I tell people about emotional eating, I'm like, okay, what's the emotion that you're eating from? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I was like, you just told me you're emotionally eating. You haven't processed. Or, I was like, but there's an emotion underpinning that. And they're like, oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. And then I'm like, okay, is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it loneliness? Is it sometimes people emotionally eat when it's positive? They'll, emotionally eat when they're feeling joy or happiness, and they'll try and heighten the sense of the feeling.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of angles from it. And so I was going to ask, was it an underrated weight loss tool, processing that? but I'm going to slightly shift the direction in terms of the question. With emotions you've been avoiding for decades, where do you generally see it showing up for people? Is it in the self-sabotage around food? Is it in the physically making themselves sick? Is it very much a case of it's different person to person? And if you want to use yourself as an example, you can. Just because I'm curious, for me, my emotional response was I didn't feel anything. I took pride in the fact that I was a robot.
Numb.
I was numb. And I was like, well, fuck it. This is amazing. I don't have to feel sadness. I don't have to feel anger. But then you don't get to feel joy, peace. You don't get to feel any of the counterbalance positive emotions. And I could go and, as you said, go for a 3-hour run. No problem. Go and train for multiple hours a day, work, and just switch everything off and not feel. And for me, it started to show itself up in self-sabotaging relationships. It started to show itself off in a disconnection from my daughter. Holly was a big opener for me when it came to, oh fuck, I can't go through the rest of my life like this. Or I'm going to just recreate, she's going to have her father wound she's going to have to process because of having a dysregulated emotional father who just wasn't there, but was there physically, but wasn't there emotionally. And that scared me because I didn't want to have that. When you think about what you see most often, the emotional tie, and it's a kind of a Pandora's box of a question, but what comes to mind when it comes to those emotions and how they regularly show up either for you or other people, so that it's awareness. Awareness is the first step and key towards change. And this is something I had no knowledge of a decade ago. Zero, none. And then when I started to pull on that thread, I was like, oh fuck, there's an unraveling here and a pattern and a programming here. What comes to mind when we talk about that?
I think a big one that comes up a lot with clients is around like de-shaming and also guilt. I think a lot of people live off a lot of deep-rooted shame and guilt for not being the kind of stereotypical successful person. And that only hit me actually a few years ago when I was like, a lot of us do the behaviors out of guilt. And when you look, and for years, I did a lot of very restricted eating. But then after I had the kids, I did emotional eating for about 2 years. And I'd never really experienced that before. And I found it really telling because I could totally pinpoint what I was doing. I was just very stressed and I wanted distraction. I was kind of in that realm. It wasn't when I was sad. Actually, I don't eat when I'm sad. And it wasn't when I was happy either. It was when I was feeling that dysregulated, stressful feeling. I wanted a distraction. And that was interesting to me to just observe that of what was happening. And with a lot of clients, they come and maybe they've had like relationship issues, some trauma, and then it all roots back. They talk about guilt and shame a lot. And when we talk about that will manifest in autoimmune conditions. It will manifest in, as I said, the simpler ones like the headaches, the skin issues. But when you look at that as a concept, a lot of people are going around with a huge amount of shame, but they don't understand why. So it's always in the back of your mind, but you're not consciously understanding why you're feeling shame or guilt. And comparison obviously is the thief of joy, and it's all around us, a mirror of what we should be and how we should look and how we should behave and the career we should have and the amount of money. And there's that deep-rooted thing that we're operating off. So then that usually looks like you self-sabotage because you have massive lack of self-belief. And that concept of self-belief is so huge for me because if you don't see yourself having the ability to do all these new behaviors, how are you meant to do them? You're just not going to do them. You're going to keep defaulting back to the person you identify with. And all that, when it comes together, it looks like a person that has shame, guilt, lack of self-belief. That's manifesting maybe physically in all different types of conditions. But then also they can't move from that stuck position because they can't see past that. So they can't see the next step. So they're not visualizing or they're not doing the regulation techniques so they're even able to visualize because they're stuck in that mental trap. So I think for me, throughout my whole 20s, when I was doing that cycle of like restriction, over exercise, there was so much shame and guilt around not being like the perfect person, I think. And I think a lot of people will resonate with that. Like they feel like they're not up to societal standards.
How does someone break that? How did you
$1,000,000 question?
How did you break that?
Yeah, I think you have to be consciously doing so much self-compassion work. Because, and I always say this to clients, when you have a lack of self-compassion and you have that coach that's saying like, eat less, train more, shut up and deal with it, that often leads you to go to the complete other way. You feel actually more worthless. And when you feel worthless, you don't feel like you can give yourself anything. You don't deserve these habits. You don't actually deserve to do these good things for yourself. And I think that erosion of self-worth and a lack of self-compassion, and when I talk about self-compassion, I just mean you're boundaried enough and kind enough to yourself to kind of support yourself to do the right things. Not let yourself off the hook, but having the compassion to say, this is the choice you should make now. This is the choice that's good for you. Like that compassionate, kind coach that can tell you, they have boundaries with you, but and they actually care about you. That's the difference. And I think that was for me. It was a skill. I had to learn self-compassion throughout my 20s because I was, like many people, a huge self-critic. Huge. The negative self-talk was cruel. So once I was able to learn, and also thinking about that when you are not self-compassionate, you bring yourself into a fight or flight response. You literally bring your body into, I'm in danger now because of all the harsh words you're saying to yourself. And that was like such a aha moment for me of like, wow, my thoughts are massively impacting my physiology, but also I'm not going to self-sabotage as much if I'm kinder to myself. And if you let that sink in for a second, the more kind you are to yourself and the more you say to yourself, right, wasn't a good day today, straight back on it now, all good, don't need to feel guilty or shameful about this. This is just human behavior. I'm not a robot. Let's drive on, And if you can have that self-talk to yourself rather than saying, I messed up, forget it now, diet starts again in January, let's leave it. That's exactly the mindset that a lot of people have that mean you will never stick to habits because you don't have the self-belief or the self-compassion, and the two tie together. You have to be self-compassionate, I think, to actually effectively build a habit. It's very difficult to build a habit if you're constantly criticizing yourself because you just go back into self-sabotage mode and you feel worthless.
A lot to unpack there. I was going to ask, do you think their thoughts impact your physiology more so than the physiology impacting the thoughts? I think there's probably an argument on both sides. Both sides.
Yeah.
But what I want to ask on the self-compassion, because I think you're absolutely spot on, and it was put so beautifully that in order to change a habit, it's very difficult without feeling like you deserve to be better. I love the Charlie Munger quote, to get what you want, you have to deserve what you want, which sounds very simple on the basis, but there's actually a lot of unpacking of old stories, old narratives, old beliefs, old biases to unpack that you actually deserve to be leaner or lose weight or have more money or be loved or be in a relationship or have a business or whatever the end goal is. How important do you think when it comes to hormones in particular? And I have my opinion on this, but you're the expert, so I'm probably just going to parrot and steal what you say for my answer going forward.
Well, I've done that to you last with all your podcasts, so go for it.
What goes around comes around. It balances out, karmic. How important do you think the deep work is when it comes to balancing out hormones? Because if we have this conversation 3 years ago, we're talking about hormones. We're talking about, your cortisol response. We're talking about, progesterone. We're talking about all these things to make sure everything's in alignment. But how important do you think this deep work is when it comes to sustainability for hormones? Because it's very easy to look at a surface level thing like hormones or body composition and go, well, if I just balance my hormones, that's the flash word that's been trending for 2 years. I just need to balance my hormones. And then when you ask someone, I'm like, what do you mean by that? They're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm supposed to balance my hormones.
Yeah.
I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, I was like, you're right. But like, what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
But when people can't go deeper than that, how important do you think the role of deep work, that emotional, the journaling, the regulation, the self-compassion, the taking yourself out of fight or flight response, the vagus nerve stimulation, all these deeper tools in that toolkit are for hormone regulation versus drinking the tea, minimizing the sugar, eat more broccoli and kale.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think in terms of that?
I think it's really subjective what the root cause of the imbalances are. So like a lot of people, the root cause of the imbalances is nervous system dysregulation. So then we know that you can't achieve a level of balance. And let's just look at it simply, right? if we have a bunch of dominoes, each domino is a hormone. So let's pick the main ones. We have insulin, progesterone, estrogen, thyroid, and testosterone, for example. Okay. If cortisol, and that's, say it's the big first domino, right? If that falls and you're deeply dysregulated and you're stressed and you're maybe physically or mentally stressed, when that domino hits, it's going to knock down the others too. So you're going to see either high or low estrogen, probably low progesterone. You're going to see blood sugar imbalance around insulin. Testosterone is going to be impacted too, libido, etc. So when you look at it like that and you see that you can't achieve a lot unless the stress is managed, but also the other hormones that we've just knocked, it can go the other way too. Because if they're not managed, that causes stress in the body. So it's looking at it again. I'm so annoying the way I always say, like, everything's grey. Everything's grey. But that person and a lot of the clients I deal with are the person, the root cause is the stress. And some of them it's physical stress because their gut is not operating well. So they have maybe like IBS, or they have some level of inflammation. And of course, we know so much more now about the gut-brain connection that we know how much that's going to impact stress on the body, your ability to have a healthy, any semblance of hormone balance. So yeah, I think the deep work is pretty vital. If you're really dysregulated, it's extremely hard to balance hormones by just eating well, exercising more, because of course your sleep's not going to be great anyway if you're really stressed, and sleep is the cornerstone of hormone balance in general. So you can't, it's very difficult to have any semblance of balance with all them hormones we mentioned without having sleep. You can't have good sleep without regulation, and that's all around cortisol. You know, the regulation and cortisol we talk about together. So it's such a good question, and I think that's a nice summary to kind of understand, everything is interconnected. All them pillars are connected, like your nutrition, nervous system regulation, mindset, exercise, circadian health. All of them pillars are intertwined together. When you take one away, you will create an imbalance. You know, your sleep's in the bin. Okay, melatonin's imbalance. That's going to impact blood sugars. Okay, you have poor mindset. That's going to affect your cortisol. That's going to impact insulin or progesterone, low progesterone. And if you look at all them pillars, and they're the pillars I work with clients, one of them gone, and you find that some hormone or multiple hormones are going to be knocked off balance.
I'm going to link up in the show notes the 4 guides that you have on the website. You've got Rebalance Nutrition, the Cortisone Regulation Toolkit, the Cycle Sync Guide, and the Solid Sleep Guide, all of which we've kind of touched on here, which provides tremendous value for people to follow up on. I'm curious because something that happens off the back of these podcasts that are what I call drinking from a fire hose. I love these episodes where you really need to go back and listen to it several times because different things will jump out and make notes. And for people that are listening, a call to action for today, any family members or friends who are struggling with nervous system regulation, pass this podcast on to them and let them go back on it a few times because it's going to really positively impact their life. But what can happen sometimes, and I have the same approach because we're what I call grey coaches, where the it depends, we're the context coaches. We're not you do keto carnivore and do CrossFit because that's the best program for everybody. We're not that type of coach. Neither of us are. And there's people out there and that's their marketing model and their business model, and that's fine. But it depends. It's context. It's grey. It's, okay, tell me about your life. Where are you struggling? How are you struggling? What's your underpinning issue here? And so, but sometimes when we go from this angle, people get confused.
Absolutely.
Where would you recommend either they start or somebody that has connected with one of the things you've said? The domino example is a beautiful visual in terms of the cortisol knocking over the other dominoes or the reverse going the other direction. For someone that's listening, that's like, okay, I'm clearly dysregulated for whatever reason, you know, whether it's work related, life related, kids, not eating well, not sleeping, etc. There's an issue there, but they're not quite sure where to start. Obviously, working with you, working with a coach, educating themselves with these guides, the other programs, the membership, all these things that are on the site. Where would you recommend somebody that wants to take a call to action off the back of this podcast? Either where to start or what might be more apt, how to start?
Yeah. I think if we look at it at levels, like there is the person now that's listening and there where I was a few years ago where I was like, wow, like don't tell me any more than one action point a day. And that's the person that in the morning says, what one thing can I do for myself today that's going to make today marginally better? You know, that could literally be a walk, you drink a glass of water in the morning, pick the simplest action step. Otherwise it's overwhelm. And we're both familiar with the feeling of overwhelm. And you just need to be so clear that when you're feeling that, you have to be your own hype man or woman of like, wow, this walk is going to transform my day. Because it probably will if you actually think of it, or so will hydration at the start of the day. So it's like that level 1, you're picking one thing. That is it. You pick one thing, you might have them in a jar and you put a load of Post-its with some options if you've total indecision fatigue. You know, you just put them in, pick them out in the morning. Oh, I'm going for a walk. Oh, I'm drinking a bit of water. Oh, I'm doing 5 deep breaths. Simple. But then when we go to the person that's now like, okay, I need to make some semblance of progress. I'm in a space where I feel I can make a few changes. Then I think that's the person that very simply looks at what's the first thing that's the most important to me that I've probably been avoiding for the longest. And usually if you look at all the areas, one will jump out at you. Like, is it nutrition that's stressing you out, or sleep, or nervous system regulation, or your like mindset? One of them will jump out, and that's then the area you put the work in. You make the daily non-negotiable plan. Another person then on the next level might be saying, I can do a few things simultaneously. Then you pick a behavior out of maybe 1 or 2 areas and you keep it at that. Because we know with behavior change, you need to make it as simplistic as possible. So I think the most important thing, and even for myself, now I'm trying to build different habits. I know I always look at the bandwagon. Some days I'm holding on by a fingertip. Some days I'm on the ground beside the bandwagon. Some days I'm sitting on the bandwagon cruising. Every day will have its own obstacles, and every day you're going to go back for the first few months to your old behaviors and you'll be like annoyed with it yourself. You just need to keep getting back on the bandwagon, even if there's a fingertip on it. Like, in that moment, not waiting for the next easy time. Like, it's so easy now to say, look, my nutrition is going to go in the bin for the next month because it's December. I'll wait till January. That's the mindset that'll keep you stuck if you keep waiting for the time that it's easy. But in saying that, the times when it's much more difficult, I think then it's worth having, yes, the self-compassion, but also the knowledge to say, my daily steps are going to be simplistic now. They're not going to be the same as when I was cruising a few months ago. I'm going to completely narrow this down now to like 3 things I'm going to do for myself a day rather than 10. And I think that's like the balance and the dance of life, where you have to acknowledge chapters of your life are different. You know, like your mental health, your headspace. Even now, people that are doing all the regulation, all the deep work, I still use my shit some days. Like, you know, some days I'm like totally triggered by what the kids do, or I freak out about something in the business. And it's like, that's normal. Even like I have friends and family members that are clinical psychologists that have done multiple PhDs, and they're still going to have bad days. Like, you're not going to be this zen creature all the time. And just like acknowledging being a human is so important, because again, you feel so guilty and so much shame if you think, oh, I can be a robot like all them people on social media who are also not.
Highlight reel.
Yeah, highlight reel. Yeah. So I think that's the most important thing. I was looking around at all the people around me thinking, wow, their lives seem like pretty straightforward. But again, you're seeing tip of the iceberg. Like, you're not seeing anything. And I always think of that person, like when I first started coaching, she messaged me about my one-to-one coaching, and I was like, why does she want to be coached? I couldn't understand it. She was like a Barbie doll, basically, and a lovely, perfect family, gorgeous big house. I was like, what is going on? She was like, I have crippling anxiety. And I was like, oh my God, nothing is as it seems. Nothing. And the more you go through life, the more you realize that everything is, you got to stick to your own lane. Like, you need to understand that comparison, as we said, is the thief of joy, but it's also not real.
I always think of social media like the Wizard of Oz, that everyone's projecting the Wizard of Oz when you're just the fucking sweaty guy behind the curtain. I was like, that's literally social media in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And the more we're probably lucky in the sense that because of what we do, the people we connect with, like I've regularly, not so much now because I've been doing this for 12 years, but the first 5 or 6, I would be looking and putting people on pedestals because of what I saw on social or listened to on podcasts. And then I would meet them either for a podcast or for networking or whatever it was. I'm like, man, they haven't got their shit together either. Like, I was like, okay. I was like, I'm okay. I'm not doing too badly. I was like, you're looking at this person on a pedestal thinking they've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
And then they're battling with all the same shit. Yeah, they might be brilliant in business, but their relationships in turmoil. And you're like, okay, they're not perfect. And the comparison syndrome, something I talk about in the new book, Rewriting Your Story, is it's called a vertical expansion of our social group or reference group. It's this day and age, we're comparing against people on social. We're comparing against people who are, quote unquote, doing so much better because we have so many more people to compare to versus 100 years ago, 200 years ago, where it was people in your village. The vertical expansion of our reference group.
Oh, I love that.
It's really good in terms of a psychological term, and that's what makes us really unhappy. And I tell people, we very rarely reference or compare down.
Yeah.
It's nearly always up. And I tell people, look, for every time, and I take inspiration. Look at people doing better than you. By all means, take inspiration from that. But if you insist on comparing up, compare with at least two people that are behind you.
Yeah.
Because we forget to do that. And if you insist on playing that game, I tell people life isn't a pick and mix. You can look at somebody and go, fuck, I love their body, or I'd love their business, or I'd love their relationship. But it's not a pick and mix. You can't pick and choose. If you're taking their business, you have to take their relationships, their health, all the other stuff that they have. And what I didn't know a decade ago that I know now is everything comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Like we could make, and the same, we're very fortunate with the living we make, 10, 15, 20 million. But if that comes at the cost of not seeing the twins or me not seeing Holly for 6 months, I'm like, fuck that.
Oh yeah.
I was like, that I don't want that. I don't want that life. And somebody else is fine with that trade-off.
Yeah.
They're like, actually, I didn't really want kids anyway.
Yeah.
I want to make this amount of money, and that's their choice. Everyone's going to live. Let people live and let live. It's not for me to judge. It's not for me to put my opinion on what they should do. They're doing them. I'm doing me. But subjectively bringing that back is very important. Yeah. What's my values? What's important to me? What kind of life do I want to live? How do I want to balance my hormones in terms of my lifestyle? How do I want to eat? How do I want to show up with people close to me? How do I want to do life? Yeah. They're very important things to ask. And I want to finish with one final question, which I think ties everything we touched on today. But for people that are listening, I'm obviously going to link up the guides, the Instagram page, the podcast, the website, all of that. Is there anyone in particular, Rebecca, you'd like to send people to off the back of this before we get into the final question?
I think just connecting on social media is so nice, and to have messages from people, because I think even though I've done the Bachelor's of Science, the Masters, the courses, all that, I learn the most from clients and from DMs. You just learn so much about how everyone's body responds differently. So yeah, definitely feel free to reach out and message. But yeah, we have our membership starting in January, and that's going to be a really nice, like, lower price point for people to make it accessible to do challenges every month. That's a really nice community. And then we have our 12-week kind of cornerstone program at the end of January, which is the Rebalance Club. But yeah, by all means, connect on social media for sure.
Perfect time. This episode's going out the 3rd week of January, so that'll be available and people can sign up then for the one coming up the end of January. So perfect time. And the last question I want to ask on, which is about non-negotiables. I think everything we've touched on here, it's nearly behavioral change, whether it's around habits, around food, around sleep, around emotional regulation, around your working through that guilt or shame spiral that's underneath. So many different areas this can apply to. But I've always found that I called them daily anchors before they were called non-negotiables. They were daily anchors for me. Things that I did every day that were anchors for me. And one of them now in 2025, 2024 and beyond was I meditate every day. Yeah. I struggled with that for years. I did a podcast that actually is coming out this week as we're recording on how to meditate for people who don't meditate with a meditation expert, because I fucking struggled for years. Couldn't figure out guided music, what I was even supposed to feel. Yeah. Like that was the biggest struggle for me with meditation was when you work with, say, a personal trainer in a gym. The analogy I gave is when you push a leg session and you're moving weight or reps that you didn't think you could do because there's a trainer there, you know how far you can push your body and then you can take that and do it yourself. Meditation was like that for me. I didn't even know what the fuck I was supposed to be focusing on. Yeah. Now I realize it's a non-observation of thoughts. Yeah. You're letting emotions, feelings, thoughts come up and you're accepting them with non-judgment and letting them pass and know that they're like waves that come up. Now I can focus on that point. So that's one of my non-negotiables. For you in 2025, whether it's something to do in your personal life, relationship, family, what's your biggest non-negotiable for 2025 and beyond?
It's funny, every year your set of non-negotiables kind of changes. Mm-hmm. And this year for me, my word I picked like in January 2024 was stillness. So I'm trying to find every day an anchor to bring more stillness. So usually for me, that's journaling before I go to bed, like brain dump prompts, because it gives me that kind of inner quiet and stills my mind a little bit. So that's probably the main one. But also, as you say, I'm only now doing the meditation every morning religiously, whereas I would have always pulled away from it because I was like, this is so difficult. This is just so painful and uncomfortable and difficult. And that went on for so long. So now that's been built into always like just the first part of the day. And I think there's a part of the day now in the middle where if I don't, I think this for a lot of people, you know, that part of the day, like after lunch, when the work build up happens, there's like a lot left to do in your mind. You're just in the middle of the day. That's when I'll do the anchor of the check-in with myself. That can be a body scan, progressive muscle relaxation, or simply asking yourself what you need right now. Do you need food? Do you need a drink? Do you need to go to the toilet? Do you need to go for a walk? What do you need? That in itself is so regulating, because if you have the time to stop to do that, that's telling the body we're not in danger. So like that alone, I literally just put my hand on my collarbones and I'm like, what do you need? And it's such an anchor to be like, we're safe, everything's good, like you're cared for by yourself, you know? So yeah, them ones for sure.
Oh, what a wonderful way to finish, Rebecca. And for those that are listening, this is an episode I recommend going back on, re-listen, make notes, have your notepad and pen or your phone, make the notes as you go along, and please share it with any family members or friends who will get benefit from this episode, and leave a rating and a review, and go check out all of Rebecca's content. This is just a short synopsis of some of the things that you cover. So there's so much value there for people. Rebecca, keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much again.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. Loved it.